This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors and Hiking Bob podcast. I'm your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which is links to my social media accounts, the other podcast I've done, my columns, which are now at the Pikes Peak Bulletin, and also my photography website. You can also drop me an email if you have a suggestion or a question or a comment, or you'd like to hear somebody or have a topic discussed on the podcast. Always looking for your suggestions. So please do all of that at hikingbob.com. And don't forget, if you like what you hear, we can always use your support. So you can go to patreon.com/hikingbob and help support this podcast. And an example of what happens with people who support this podcast, today we're using a new platform, which I think is going to result in a much better quality podcast than you've heard when we do remote ones, and also a new microphone that I have here today, and all that with the help of all the people who support this podcast at Patreon. So thank you to the supporters. And if you'd like to help, which the money goes into paying for the podcast, you can do that at patreon.com. Today we're going to talk about something a little different, and I think something kind of exciting, and some of you daredevils out there may want to try this, but we're going to talk about paragliding. And my guest today is Martin Palmaz. And Martin, thank you for being on the podcast.
Pleasure to join you.
So we're going to talk about paragliding. You and I had a lot of discussions at different meetings. A lot of this came up during the Blodgett open space master plan process, because there was a proposal to bring in eventually at some point, not right away, some space for paragliding to happen there. And a lot of questions came up. A lot of people didn't understand the difference. I wasn't sure I understood what it was. So tell us what paragliding is, and I guess what's the difference between that and parasailing and hang gliding and ultralight aircraft? What is paragliding, and how is it different from all that other stuff?
Yeah, so hang gliding and paragliding are both forms of ultralight aviation. Ultralights also incorporate other things like ultralight aircraft, powered aircraft, but hang gliding and paragliding in particular are unpowered ultralights. And all ultralights are defined by FAR 103, which is regulations that define the use of ultralights in the national airspace. So an ultralight doesn't require training, and it doesn't require certification of the aircraft or the individual flying it. However, it goes without saying that flying without any training is a bad idea. And that's one of the reasons that the U.S. Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association was formed, was to provide that training as a community-based organization. And USHPA has been around for over 50 years and was a big part of the formation of ultralight regulations. But the main difference between hang gliding and paragliding came after hang gliding. Hang gliding started in the 60s and evolved from the Regalo wing, which is named after the inventor of that, Francis Regalo, who was a NASA engineer and was used to create reentry methods for the space program. That was given openly to the community, and from there, enthusiasts were able to create original early prototypes and modifications of the Delta wing. And so that evolved into today's high performance and full spectrum of hang gliders today, which are rigid structure, aluminum frame, tubing, and cable reinforcing with a control frame below it so that you can do weight shift. Paragliding evolved a little bit later and really became mainstream in the early 90s, late 80s. And has evolved from there. And that's really rammed air wing parachute, but a little bit more aerodynamic and higher performance, much better glide ratio than your typical parachuting wing, which is smaller in size and designed to handle the dynamic loading of free fall and transitioning from free fall to flight. Paragliders are elliptical in plan and arched in elevation, and they're range anywhere from 8 to 1 to maybe 12 or 15 to 1 glide ratio. Hang gliders maybe anywhere from 12 to 20, give or take. But they're amazing aircraft and can be quite compact. A hang glider is a little bit larger structure because of the tubing, so you'll have things that are usually mounted on top of trucks. They're roughly, I'd say, 15 feet long, and then they're opened up and assembled. Paraglider fits in a backpack, and you can hike that to almost any location. So that's one of the reasons that we have more prevalence of paragliding here in Colorado Springs, because we only have hike up sites available to us for flying. That might evolve in the future. I don't know if Blodgett will incorporate hang gliding in the future or not. Yet to be determined. But certainly the two hike up sites that we have here, Section 16 and Mount Herman, are both hike up sites and really lovely places to fly during the flying season.
And they're a bit of a hike too to get to both of those spots.
They're each about an hour, yeah.
Yeah, about an hour to get up there. So you mentioned the paragliding is like a parachute, sort of, not quite.
Yeah.
And I've skydived once in advanced free fall. I did not. I wasn't tethered, parachuted on my own, with something big and round and about the size, that they would drop a tank out of. Obviously, they didn't want me coming in real hot and fast. Some of those guys I saw doing that were on something the size of a tablecloth, and how they control crashed into the ground without hurting themselves was beyond me. They came in fast. So we're talking about something not quite that fast. I guess you don't land like some of these skydivers do at a pretty fast clip. I'm imagining you coming in more like a nice slow landing after gliding around a while. So the idea is the parachute is there to just control your crash into the ground. You're up there to kind of glide around and kind of have a good time while you're up there, while slowly making your way to the ground. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, actually a little bit more than that. Okay. We have the capacity of thermal flying and flying cross country. So both with ridge lift or thermal lift, we're able to maintain and or even gain altitude. So locally, we've had flights that last several hours and have gone up to 17,800 feet was one of my last flights in the fall last year. So, they're really amazing aircraft. And when you come in to land, you are flaring as you're approaching the ground. So you're basically doing a stall as you're reaching the ground. And can be a very easy transition and maybe take a few steps. And, it's not difficult at all. Hang gliders fly a little bit faster, so you might need to run a bit, but it's the same principle. You have a flare that you're doing as you're approaching the ground, and that slows you down for you to be able to transition to your feet.
So that flare is like when an airplane lands, you see just before they hit the runway, they pull the nose up a little bit, and that's that last little bit. They pull the nose up, it slows it down. They just gently. So that's what you're doing when you're landing. You're pulling that nose up sort of, and just that really slows the plane down a little bit, or it slows you down a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. With a paraglider, you're flaring with the brakes.
Okay.
Creating the drag to do that. And with a hang glider, you are pushing out the control frame and pushing the nose up and doing the same thing.
Cool.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention that in terms of the difference with parasailing is dedicated to an activity, usually at the beach, on water. You're towed behind a boat.
Okay.
And you're always tethered. You never let go. You never really.
So the parasailing is the thing that tourists do when they go to Mexico and they get dragged around a bay someplace.
Correct. Yeah.
for lack of a better way to describe it, which is probably no less fun, but with
just different.
Yeah, just different. And somebody is, like I said, you're tethered to something.
Yeah.
During the discussion, and I don't want to belabor this, but there was a lot of misconception. During the discussion of the Blodgett Open Space Master Plan, there were a lot of people concerned about the effects that paragliding would have on the visitor experience, the wildlife. My own experience was, and I've not done this, I might want to try this, but I haven't done this, but I've been to up in Douglas County at Lincoln Mountain. There was somebody paragliding off of there one day And to be honest with you, I had no idea they were up there till they landed in the parking lot about 60 feet behind me. And then when I went up to the big broad mesa up there, again, it's a hike-in spot, and they were up there and they were picking up, I guess, the thermals and just kind of bebopping around before they came down. No sound whatsoever, didn't hear a thing. What are some of the misconceptions you heard or some of the concerns you heard during that whole master plan process that you had to work to dispel during that whole, because I know you spent a lot of time talking to people. I saw you at a lot of the hearings that, we were doing and a lot of the public engagement. What were some of the things you thought you want to take the top opportunity to dispel about misconceptions people might have about it?
Sure, yeah. I think that there's, a lot of people just aren't familiar with the sport and the way the aircraft function and what happens. But yeah, generally speaking, the aircraft itself is silent. You might hear a very small amount of sound with the wind passing over the aircraft. And then for a paraglider, when it comes down, you'll hear the fabric. But apart from that, it's a very silent aircraft. And one of the other aspects, of course, is, I think there's concern about the use of trails. Obviously, since we're flying down, we're using the trails half as much most of the time. There are times where we'll hike down because maybe the conditions aren't correct. But the other aspect is just understanding the regulations that I mentioned before. We're not allowed to fly over densely populated areas. And so not a very hard line definition that's obviously open for some interpretation, but generally speaking, we're not allowed to fly over densely populated areas. So the obvious thing that would happen is, we'll be flying along the ridgeline. And if we're further north, like we are at Mount Herman, flying east is one of something that happens often because it's much less densely populated and there's no airspace restrictions. So we're able to explore and go cross country north or east from Mount Herman quite easily. There are people, some of the state records are over 100 miles, maybe closer to 200. So you can, once you get up with enough altitude, then you can start to fly away to other destinations. For example, I know one individual who flew from a 300-foot hill in Golden and landed in Canyon City. So,
wow.
Yeah. Or, people fly from Golden and they'll fly up to Wyoming. So distances and the altitudes are incredible. So, the other is just our ability to control the aircraft. We have a high degree of precision. One of the things that happens is spot landing competitions, and, people can land within 10 or 20 feet of their desired landing location. So, there's a lot of precision in the ability to land where we want or need to. And in terms of training, I would say most people can get certified within a week or two if you're doing it every day. And once you're trained, you purchase your own gear. This was something that came up during the final stages of the process, was concern about just people coming in and renting gear. And that's not something that's really done. Unless you're certified, you wouldn't be buying gear. There might be the occasional person who buys something off the internet, which is highly discouraged and dangerous because it's a very risky sport, and it's really an important step to be properly trained. There's a lot of complexity to understanding the weather and the implications on the aircraft, and to learn to control it in various conditions. So, the community really supports being properly trained and all of that in order to participate in a safe manner.
I imagine it's like being a skydiver. Do you want to pack your own parachute, or you want to trust somebody else to do it for you?
Luckily, it's a little different. However,
I'm saying, about whether you rent somebody's gear or buy your own gear, that kind of a thing. Which are you going to trust a little bit more? Right.
Knowing your gear is very important because they all have very different characteristics. Right. The wings are rated for different types of characteristics. A wings are for beginner, more stable, a little bit slower. and it goes up to D wings, which are uncertified and usually used for competitions, but highly efficient and that type of thing. So yeah, there's a wide range of wings as well as a wide range of harnesses that have different characteristics as well. And the same is true for hang gliding. But yeah, you really want to have gear that you are familiar with in order to understand what that experience is going to be like when you fly. So you might try another friend's wing, but renting gear is not something that's done. You might train on gear that's owned by a school, but then once that process is complete, you would purchase your own equipment, and that would include the harness, the wing, the reserve parachute, helmet, radio, location device. There's an altimeter, GPS tracking device. So yeah, there's lots of different aspects of it to incorporate when you're flying.
It sounds like it's like I mentioned when I went skydiving, I had a big round parachute. Wasn't very steerable. I mean, I steered it right into a yucca bush, so I didn't do that well with it. But the guys who were there doing it, who had hundreds and hundreds of jumps, had rectangular parachutes, and they were much faster, but they knew, how to come in and land. I just crashed. But so it's sort of like that with this. You have, like you said, the A wing, which I guess is bigger and probably more air, probably more surface area, so it catches more air, so it doesn't go as fast. I guess that's what the difference is between them. And the arch, you mentioned the arch a little different on them.
Yeah, they're just different configurations. Generally speaking, the aspect ratio of the wing, so the actual depth of the wing, deeper wings, generally speaking, are more stable. The higher, more efficient wings are thinner, a little bit more unstable, but they're much more efficient and have better glide ratios. So you have trade-offs between the different aspects of those wings for different purposes.
When we think of a hang glider, we think of somebody who's kind of laying flat, sort of on that. In paragliding, are you more like standing up? Are you more vertical than you're horizontal, or how are you situated? How are you oriented when you're in one of these?
Yeah, they're a little different. Correct. A hang glider, you're horizontal, face down, and parallel with the earth, and holding a control frame to change your weight position. And then in a paraglider, you're sitting more in a harness that is like a chair. And so you have two types. One is kind of an open harness with everything exposed. And then another harness is a pod. And so you're able to actually tuck your legs into a little cocoon, which makes you a little bit more aerodynamic. And it keeps you a little warmer too. As you get up higher, it gets cold. But then also it changes a little bit the way your weight is distributed. So it can change, not always, but can change the characteristics of flying the wing just because your weight is distributed in a slightly different way, but not significantly.
Okay.
So those are the two types of harnesses for paragliding.
I think during the whole discussion about this, people were thinking hang gliders, which you said have the big metal frame,
right?
And they're bigger. I think that's what some people were thinking of. They didn't want to see some big metal thing coming out of the sky at them or something like that. But this is obviously, like you said, you put it in a backpack, and it's a very small fabric thing.
Yeah, they range in size. Obviously, tandems are bigger to be able to fly with two people. I don't know, tandems are a separate discussion. But in terms of the technology and the evolution of the equipment, it's amazing how much it's changed. My gear is maybe 35 pounds, and that's, I have two wings. One's maybe a little bit less than that, closer to 25 or 30. But you can get it down to an incredibly lightweight system with a very basic minimalist harness and lightweight wing and whatnot. I mean, you can get an entire kit down to maybe 10 pounds.
Wow.
And yeah, so it really depends on the use case and what your purpose is and what your preferences are. So there's a wide range. Hang gliders definitely are a little bit bigger. They're just, I would say, just as silent in many ways, but they need just a little bit more space to launch and land. Well, maybe just land. Launching under the right conditions really is the same. In paragliding, it's just a few steps, and then you're airborne.
Am I right? And my knowledge of the physics of flight is very rudimentary, but would the bigger wings that you use give you those long distances you were talking about? If somebody's carrying one of the really small, like you said, something you can squeeze into like a 10 pound, 10 pounds, are they going to be more shorter distance, or is that not what the distance you go depends on?
Right. So generally speaking, most wings come in different sizes because you need to be within a certain weight range in order for the wing to be flying at the characteristics it was designed to fly at. So all of the wings are tested by a rating agency. And, does it fly as an A wing? Does it fly as a B wing or C wing or what have you? And so all of those ratings are based on weight ranges for that particular wing size. And so if you want a certified wing, then you create those different sizes and test all of those sizes with the correct weight, pilots and gear and everything. So, usually you might fluctuate within that weight range, and those have different characteristics. If you're on the light end, you can get lift a little easier, but the wing is maybe a little bit less responsive. Whereas if you're a little heavier, then you don't have as much ease of lift, but you have much more responsive wing. So different elements to the subtleties of those differences.
You mentioned learning how to do this, and you could get certified, you said, in a week if you go every day. I'm guessing that, and you touched on briefly tandem. I guess you do this as the training is done in a tandem type of a thing, like with skydiving. Typically, you go tandem so that you don't scare the daylights out of yourself by jumping off a cliff or whatever. But take us through the training process. How does somebody say, I want to do this? First, who do they call? Or who do they contact? And then what's the training process like?
Yeah, the U.S. Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association has certified instructors all over the country. So you can train both directly in solo training and or with tandem training. So both have different elements that are beneficial. If you sort of know right away that you want to learn to fly, you might start off with just immediately learning to train with solo wings. So you would, learn to ground handle the wing, how to control it, how to get it above head and launch and land, and of course some of the basics for weather and understanding that. Tandem is another avenue to learn and adjust and modify training because you have the ability to fly with an instructor and have direct input on various aspects of the training process because they're right there with you. And you can do maybe some things that you wouldn't be able to do as easily, like learning how to thermal fly or provide a little bit more direct input in the controls that simultaneously with the instructor to be able to feel the changes that happen as you're flying and what you're looking for when you enter a thermal and how the wing feels and its difference. So there's benefits to both types of training. But and also, depending on location, that might dictate one is easier to do than the other.
You mentioned solo training, so I'm just trying to envision how you do this without doing a tandem. Is there some classroom training before? I'm just trying to envision that somebody's not going to go say, well, here's your chute. If this happens, do this and run off this cliff and we'll see you at the bottom. I know that's not how it's done. So Take us through that. I mean, there's some classroom training. How do you get somebody who's doing this solo? How do you work them up to where they're actually going off a mountain and doing this on their own?
Right. So you'll, connect with a school, and there's always ground school involved with that to teach you some basics about the weather and the wind conditions that you're looking for, as well as the basics of aerodynamics and the way that these particular wings work and fly. So all of that will be covered, and some might be provided online as well. But then when you're out on the hill, you put that training into practice. You learn and start with the basics, just how to control the wing, how everything's connected, what are the safety elements that you need to keep in mind, and the protective gear, and then learn slowly how to control the wing. And then you'll bring it up above your head. It's a dual membrane wing, rammed air wing. So the wind will blow into it, give it structure. You lift it up above your head. And there might be a strong enough wind to do that. Or you might have to run to create that wind if there's no wind. But, you practice and try all of these different methods of getting the wing above your head. And then you will start in, for lack of a better term, a bunny hill, a very small hill, to be able to just do a very short flight where you might literally just have your feet off the ground a few feet. But I guarantee you that will be one of the most memorable flights you have, is when you feel your feet leave the ground for more than a second. So it's a really magical experience. And then, of course, as you gain more experience and learn more skills, then you might go to larger hills, and it's all under radio control. So the instructor is providing you direct feedback as you're doing the various steps of the flight and the training. So it's also really nice if you're able to just do it all at once. Then you can build on the previous day's experience and skills and knowledge, and it's easy to pick up fairly quickly. And then, of course, that's just the beginning. There's multiple ratings beyond the solo rating. So, one is student, and two is beginner, and 2 is when you are able to fly solo, and then there's 3 and 4 and 5 ultimately. But as you progress, it takes time to get experience in various wing types and conditions and sites before you advance through the various rating system levels.
So here you mentioned a couple of places that this is already happening at, one of which is Mount Herman up near Monument. The other one is Section 16 down the southwest part of town. I've actually been hiking in Bear Creek Park and had somebody land right in Bear Creek Park, which just seems like that's perfect for that. How do those two hills rate? Are they tall for this? Are they short hills? Are they bunny hills? Probably not bunny hills, but how do they rate in the sphere of, has anybody done this off of Pikes Peak, for example? I shudder to think that somebody has, but I'm guessing somebody out there has actually done something like that. But so where do these two hills rate, and how would Pikes Peak rate? It's got to be one of the hardest ones. It's 14,000 feet, for crying out loud. But
yeah, so the altitude is a factor in the way that the characteristics are to launch at any wing. So, but I would say that all of the sites that are local are more advanced.
Okay.
Just the nature of the launches themselves. So Section 16 is a small launch. It's at the face.
It's right at the end of that little trail that comes off the top there. I've been out there. It's like this little tiny, the trail just ends right at the end of this cliff, and it's not very big surface area there.
It's very steep. It's loose gravel. So it's a little bit tricky to lay out the wing and launch. Also, the ridge trails behind you, so you don't have any immediate ridge lift. So, there's some more advanced aspects to launching from that spot. The same's true for Mount Herman. It's more of a cliff launch. It's a little bit larger, a little bit wider, and I think there's, it's a little bit easier, but it's still an advanced.
Yeah, it's that little shelf right off of the summit there. Kind of that little shelf there, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course both have beautiful landing zones that are great for landing. And then we do actually have the ability to fly Pikes Peak, generally not from the top, but from Devil's Playground, which faces north, and then you can land at Elk Knoll, or Elk Park, I think it's called. But it doesn't happen very often that people fly it. I think just the logistics of flying there and the turnaround time and the access and all of that, it's less common for people to want to try, but it is feasible to fly off of the peak.
So I imagine people do this in different parts of the country. They probably do it off the cliffs, like I'm picturing California. They do it off, one of the cliffs along the shoreline there, sea level, basically. Here, in town, we're at 6,300 feet, so you're launching from a lot higher. how does that impact how, I guess you kind of said these are more advanced. Is it because also we're at this altitude, not just because of the characteristics? Like you said, section 16, you're off the end. There's nothing below you until you land. You don't have well, this isn't going well. I'm just going to turn and land here. You're going to the bottom. So you got to learn how to fly there. It makes it more difficult. Does the altitude also make it more difficult? Do you need bigger wings here than you would at lower elevations because there's more air density at lower elevations? How does that work?
Yeah, so the main difference is the air density. So when you're flying at the coast, it's much thicker, buoyant air. So that is just a factor to keep in mind when you're flying at different elevations. You have to prepare for landings a little bit differently because when you're at altitude, especially launching, for example, if you're launching at 12,000 feet or 10,000 feet, the air is much thinner, so you need the aircraft to generally be faster because you have to create enough energy to create lift. And when the air is thinner, it takes a little bit more speed to do that. The same is true when landing. You will be coming in faster because there's less resistance to that. So they're just different characteristics, and you modify the way that you prepare for those launches and landings depending on the altitude that you're operating at.
So if somebody wanted to do this, and I'm hoping we've talked somebody into this who's been wondering what this is all about, go, I want to try this out. What is the cost to get into this? What is training cost, and what is equipment average? Like if I'm a beginner and I said, I want to learn this, what's it going to cost me to learn it? And then what's it going to cost me for my first set of basic equipment?
So you have schools all around the country, and they have varying pricing for their service. Roughly speaking, every day, 1 to 2 weeks doing training if the weather cooperates and good skills and all that. I would say price is probably, anywhere from maybe $1,500 to $2,000 to $4,000. And again, location and various elements dictate what a particular school might.
Different markets, I imagine, are different.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for a ballpark.
Yeah. And then once you're done training, then you would purchase the gear. And that's, I would say, probably in the $6,000-$7,000 range for wing and harness and a reserve. And then, of course, you'll want the helmet and just the clothing to go with that, as well as some instrumentation that you don't need to get right away, but eventually you'll get, a variometer, which gives you your altitude and how quickly you're going up and down, a GPS device, a tracker. The Vario also has GPS in it, so you can fly a course line if you want to eventually do competitions, and radio to be able to communicate with other pilots in the air.
You're looking at an aviation band radio.
There are frequencies approved by the FCC specifically for the purpose of flying. There's, I think, 5 channels that are used for that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. It sounds like a lot of fun. I'm not sure I'm going to do it. I'm getting a little old for this kind of stuff, but it sounds like, if when I did my one skydive thing, it's probably been, probably close to 15 years ago now. Much younger. I wanted to do it. I had an instructor. I was on the fire department, and there was a guy there who was a skydiver. He took a couple of us out and taught us how to do it. And we went up 12,000 feet and jumped out of the plane. And it was a blast. And he had a camera on his helmet because he went with me. It wasn't tandem, but the instructor went out with me. He had a camera. He got it all on video. I could prove that I did it. And I was one and done. I was happy with what happened with that. This sounds like a whole lot of fun. You're obviously more in control. You really are flying, not just riding the parachute down. So you really are flying. This sounds like it's a blast to do. If somebody wanted to find out more about this, you mentioned the U.S. Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association?
Correct. Yeah, the website is ushpa.org.
ushpa.org.
On that website, you can find where to learn page that provides information on instructors around the country that are certified to train.
Awesome. Martin, this has been a great conversation. You and I have been talking about this for a while, and we talked about doing this in the fall, but it was like, well, that's not the season for this. This is the season coming up here. We're in spring, going into summer. This is the season for people to be doing. It's warmer anyway. You're going to be at altitude. You want it to be warm, if nothing else. So I imagine you don't want to do this in a parka and add 20 pounds to your weight. It's probably not really well suited for that. Martin, thank you so much. This has been very entertaining. If somebody wanted to contact you and have more information, can they find you on the website, or how can somebody contact you?
Yeah, I'm not a certified instructor, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about the sport and any aspects that they might have questions about here locally. They can email me at zamlap@gmail.com, and I'm happy to connect with anyone about that. I think the exciting thing about what's happening now in the future with Blodgett, there's a nice small hill there that I think will be a really interesting element to the assets here in the city for possible training. And then, of course, we'll see what happens in the future with the quarry. But those are both really fascinating and new elements to the local paragliding scene that could be really interesting, and looking forward to what that could evolve into.
Yeah, that bottom part of that newest edition of Blodgett below the quarry, I've hiked through there, is perfectly suited for landing there. It's wide, it's flat, there's no trees. It seemed like it was designed for it. I can see why you were advocating to add this to the master plan, and why the Parks Department was kind of like, yeah, that's not a bad idea. It seemed like a really good place. It's everything you could want for this type of activity. Come off of there. Probably somebody more advanced would want to do something a little further away, but if you're learning, it's right there. So it seems like a pretty cool place. Well, Martin, thanks again for being on the podcast. Is there anything that I forgot to ask you that you wanted to mention before we go?
I don't think so. I think we've covered most of the important points, but of course, happy to answer any questions in the future.
Awesome. Well, Martin, thank you so much. Martin Palmaz, who is an expert at paragliding. Make sure I get that right. And that's a pretty cool activity going on here in the Pikes Peak region. I've seen them out there. You don't even know they're up there. They make no noise. They're just up there with the hawks and the falcons just gliding around. And then they come in and land, and you don't even know they're there. So it's a pretty cool activity. And if you want to try this, the U.S. Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association, I will have a link in the show notes, and check it out. And with that, everyone, thank you for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Pod podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.